Hi there guys, I hope you are having a good day. Grab yourself a cup of tea and let's talk some boxing. Now, Dillian Whyte has ripped into Tyson Fury. This is what he had to say about the whole situation with Tyson Fury AJ and Wilder also. Tyson Fury has effed up the entire heavyweight scene and the whole sport is struggling because of it. Losing AJ versus Fury effed boxing because casual fans see big fights not happening and people at the top lying to them or fighting bums instead. So there we go, that is what Dillian Whyte has explained about the current situation. Now obviously, he is someone who is waiting for a chance to fight Tyson Fury, or even AJ, anyone at the top really, Dillian Whyte will take. I mean, as long as there is a world title on the line, because that is what he is looking toward now, after having these big fights against Joe Parker, against Oscar Rivas, Chisora in there as well. He's had some great fights, Alexander Povetkin as well. So Dillian Whyte is looking to move on and get that world title chance. It hasn't been easy for him, so you can understand his frustration, but you can also understand his frustration in the fact that he wants to make that fight, but he is seeing Tyson Fury and AJ not happen, and he is looking to get potentially a mandatory slot next year. Now, had Undisputed happened this year, and he is called as mandatory next year, then things are going to look a little bit better for Dillian Whyte, because you wouldn't expect Dillian Whyte to get a world title chance this year regardless of what happens, so that's fair enough. Had Undisputed happened twice this year, and Dillian Whyte gets called as mandatory next year, then there is no reason to put that off. But with Tyson Fury versus Deontay Wilder being postponed, and the fact that AJ will fight a couple of weeks before Tyson Fury, they're going to be looking to make Undisputed, or at least make those talks happen again, the negotiations where it seems like nothing is going to happen, but they still say it's going to happen, even though last time around it did not. But that all is going to start up again, and Dillian Whyte is going to be in the position of waiting for an opportunity and hoping that it actually happens. Now, for 5 months we were led to believe that AJ versus Fury was going to happen. Some of us did not believe it, and I think that we were right to be skeptical at times. I mean, I thought it was going to happen, but then came in talks of Deontay Wilder again. Tyson Fury mentioned it, Bob Arum mentioned it, and there was talks of a reserve July 24th date, and that is when things started to look a little bit more doubtful when it comes to making Undisputed. I think Dillian Whyte is right. There are casual fans out there who see Tyson Fury, Anthony Joshua, but they don't see them fighting one another. Of course, there are politics, there are things behind the scenes, but all of those things are the reasons why the fights don't happen. What I cannot understand, well, we can understand it and I'll tell you why in a minute, but Josh Taylor versus Jose Ramirez, that fight happened, undisputed. There wasn't lengthy negotiations, there wasn't years and years of waiting to make an undisputed fight in that weight class. They built towards it. There was the World Boxing Super Series. Ramirez wasn't in that, but eventually they all got in with one another. Now Josh Taylor emerges as undisputed champion. So in that super lightweight division, they now have a renowned number one. Yet in the heavyweight division, who can you call number one? I mean, it's a matter of opinion. We can say that it's AJ because he has the best resume, the most world titles, and he's defended his world titles back to back. Lost them, won them again. But then there could be those who say, no, it's Tyson Fury because he's undefeated, he's beaten Deontay Wilder, and Vladimir Klitschko, he was the one who ended that reign. I mean, you can go back and forth because they haven't fought one another, and until they have, we will not know who is number one. Now, politics is the reason why. Money is the reason why. When there is a lot of money on the line, like there is in the heavyweight division, that seems to make fights far more difficult to make because there isn't the same kind of money in the super lightweight division, so the fight gets made. Another big thing as well is Josh Taylor and Jose Ramirez are on the same platform. Now Tyson Fury and AJ are not, so that makes it easier for Jose Ramirez versus Josh Taylor to be made. Imagine if Josh Taylor signed with Matchroom or PBC, more likely Matchroom. Can you imagine Undisputed happening? It's still more possible than AJ versus Fury because the money that would be on the line for AJ Fury wouldn't be there for Taylor versus Ramirez. But it is going to make it more difficult because Top Rank would be representing Jose Ramirez and Matchroom would be representing Josh Taylor. So Taylor knew what he had to do. If he wanted to make that fight, he had to sign with Top Rank, and that's the reason why. That was the motivation for him to go with them. Because these promoters don't want their champion to lose their belts and the belts to go to a different platform, then it's harder to get them back, and then they have just lost a world champion and someone who can generate them more revenue because they are a world champion and could be considered as number one, but not sure until they fight someone else, until they fight the other guy who could cement their legacy as number one of that weight class. But it's too risky to do it. If they are not on the same platform, if they are, then that platform still has the number one. They still have a champion in that weight class with multiple world titles, aka Josh Taylor, still with Top Rank, still undisputed. Jose Ramirez is still with Top Rank, but they have the champion on their platform. Now, another thing is Tyson Fury versus AJ is the end game for the heavyweight division. That's where it gets to the point where we get to see who is number one of this era. I think whoever wins that fight, you can hardly argue that they are number one. You'd have to say it because that's the whole point of doing the contest. I mean, yes, all of the belts are on the line, and that is significant, but not half as significant as what that fight represents without the belts. So we will know who is number one, and it is a fight that has eluded the heavyweight division even when Deontay Wilder was heavyweight champion. The negotiations constantly broke down, but if you look at it from the start to the end, you can see that there was more money involved with AJ versus Wilder at the end compared to the start. Same with Fury versus Joshua. The money just keeps getting more and more, so that's kind of motivating them to keep pushing it back. I know that Eddie Hearn had that site deal done, and everything was agreed. They were literally right there. Then the arbitration ruled that Fury must face Wilder. It's just another spanner going into the works, and I know that it cannot be avoided, but apparently there was a way that they could have avoided it back in December. Now, Dillian Whyte alluded to the fact that it is messing up the heavyweight division, in other words of course, but it is messing up the heavyweight division because there are challengers who want to get their opportunity, namely Dillian Whyte, but there are other challengers as well to Anthony Joshua because AJ holds 4 world titles, 3 if you're not going to count the IBO, and mandatories will come for those 3 major world titles. It was Pulev, then it was Usyk, but if you look at the 5 months they spent trying to make Undisputed, there was a lot of inactivity in there for AJ. He could have been fighting in May, and he could have fought twice this year, so that would be Usyk dealt with, then he goes on to potentially a voluntary later in the year, if not for all of the negotiations with Tyson Fury that led him nowhere, that only led him back to Usyk, his mandatory in the first place. And it's not doing boxing any good. I mean, I know that Usyk versus AJ is a good fight, it's going to be entertaining, and it's going to be interesting as well, so I don't have a problem with that. I'm not so keen on Wilder Fury 3 because I just really don't see the point in it. I'm not annoyed that AJ is fighting Usyk, but if you look at it from a casual fan's perspective or someone looking at boxing from the outside, they see them talking about Undisputed. Oh, this big fight might happen, that's really cool. Then all of a sudden it doesn't, and all of the reasons come out why, and they just think, what's the point in all of that? I'll just go watch the UFC. And that is the big problem. All of the politics, all of the negotiations amount to what we have gotten. AJ fighting his mandatory, which he would have if not for the Tyson Fury negotiations, and Wilder fighting Fury, the same kind of situation. If not for the negotiations, they would have been fighting Wilder anyway. So after all of that, AJ ends up in the ring with a mandatory, and Tyson Fury ends up facing Wilder again. So those 5 months of negotiations amounted to nothing. I mean, I know that Eddie Hearn secured it, and that is brilliant, but it didn't come off. Just the way things have panned out. And again, AJ versus Usyk is an intriguing fight. I think it's going to be entertaining, and AJ does always bring value for money. I'm interested to see how Usyk deals with the size and pressure of Anthony Joshua, because it is going to be a gap that he's going to have to bridge. It isn't going to be easy, and he hasn't made waves in the heavyweight division since moving up. Having said that, AJ is a different style to Witherspoon and Chisora, so things will be different. Just because Chisora made Usyk struggle and made it difficult, could have even gotten a decision in that fight, doesn't mean that AJ is going to have it that easy just because there are levels between Chisora and AJ. Styles make fights. So that one will be interesting, but going back to Dillian Whyte, you can see his frustration. You can see why he would be fed up with the situation. As a fan as well, I guess, because obviously he does follow boxing, but as a boxer amongst it all, being a challenger waiting so long for an opportunity. I mean, at this point someone could have picked Dillian Whyte. I know that he's been trying to become mandatory, but just look at some of the fighters who have gotten a world title opportunity in the past 2 or 3 years, and you cannot tell me that they deserve it any more than Dillian Whyte. And that is the big problem. As I said, someone could have picked Dillian Whyte. He's a top contender. If they wanted a big fight, if they wanted a big test, that is the person to go to. If they cannot make a unification or something like that, then Dillian Whyte is a big test. I know it hasn't been easy for Anthony Joshua because he's had unifications, rematches, and of course, mandatory challenges coming left, right and centre, which is of course the price of being a unified champion, having multiple world championships. But then you look at someone like Deontay Wilder, who wanted a big test, who wanted a big fight, so why not go down the route of Dillian Whyte? Why not give him the chance? But this current situation is making the heavyweight division stagnate. It is making challengers like Dillian Whyte wait for their opportunity, because there are challengers behind him who want a chance at a world championship, but they cannot come before Dillian Whyte. In fact, a few years back there was talk of AJ versus Dillian Whyte again, because AJ was looking for an opponent. That was when I believe he ended up in the ring with Jarrell Miller, or was supposed to, but ended up in the ring with Andy Ruiz. But something was offered to Dillian Whyte, and he made the decision to try and become mandatory, so that in the rematch he could say, AJ, this is your split, this is what I'm giving you, this is what you gave me for the first fight, and you can take that. That was the reason why he didn't take it, because he wanted to become mandatory, win the belts like he believed he could, then in the rematch he could give AJ the split that AJ gave to him in the first one, a mandatory split. So that was the reasoning for Dillian Whyte not to go in there with AJ, and he didn't believe he had enough time to prepare for that contest either. Anyway guys, what are your thoughts on this? Make sure you leave your thoughts in the comments below, also leave a like and grab that subscribe button. Thanks guys.